passed, and she did not return. He looked eagerly at the superscription of all the notes and letters, but there was not one among them which he could fancy to be in her handwriting. On 2 or 3 occasions he was employed on business which took him to a distance, and had formerly been transacted by Tim Linkinwater. Nicholas could not help suspecting that, for some reason or other, he was sent out of the way on purpose, and that the young lady was there in his absence. Nothing transpired, however, to confirm this suspicion, and Tim could not be entrapped into any confession or admission tending to support it in the smallest degree. Mystery and disappointment are not absolutely indispensable to the growth of love, but they are, very often, its powerful auxiliaries. Out of sight, out of mind is well enough as a proverb, applicable to cases of friendship, though absence is not always necessary to hollowness of heart, even between friends, and truth and honesty, like precious stones, are perhaps most easily imitated at a distance, when the counterfeits often pass for real. Love, however, is very materially assisted by a warm and active imagination, which has a long memory, and will thrive for a considerable time on very slight and sparing food. Thus it is that it often attains its most luxuriant growth in separation and under circumstances of the utmost difficulty. And thus it was that Nicholas, thinking of nothing but the unknown young lady, from day to day and from hour to hour, began at last to think that he was very desperately in love with her, and that never was such an ill-used and persecuted lover as he. Still, though he loved and languished after the most orthodox models, and was only deterred from making a confidant of Kate by the slight considerations of having never, in all his life, spoken to the object of his passion, and having never set eyes upon her, except on 2 occasions, on both of which she had come and gone like a flash of lightning, or, as Nicholas himself said, in the numerous conversations he held with himself, like a vision of youth and beauty much too bright to last, his ardour and devotion remained without its reward. The young lady appeared no more, so there was a great deal of love wasted, enough indeed to have set up 6 young gentlemen, as times go, with the utmost decency, and nobody was a bit the wiser for it, not even Nicholas himself, who, on the contrary, became more dull, sentimental, and lackadaisical every day. While matters were in this state, the failure of a correspondent of the brothers Cheeryble in Germany imposed upon Tim Linkinwater and Nicholas the necessity of going through some very long and complicated accounts, extending over a considerable space of time. To get through them with the greater dispatch, Tim Linkinwater proposed that they should remain at the counting-house for a week or so until 10 o'clock at night. To this, as nothing damped the zeal of Nicholas in the service of his kind patrons, not even romance, which has seldom business habits, he cheerfully assented. On the very first night of these later hours, at 9 exactly, there came, not the young lady herself, but her servant, who, being closeted with brother Charles for some time, went away, and returned next night at the same hour, and on the next, and on the next again. These repeated visits inflamed the curiosity of Nicholas to the very highest pitch. Tantalized and excited beyond all bearing, and unable to fathom the mystery without neglecting his duty, he confided the whole secret to Newman Noggs, imploring him to be on the watch next night, to follow the girl home, to set on foot such inquiries relative to the name, condition, and history of her mistress as he could without exciting suspicion, and to report the result to him with the least possible delay. Beyond all measure proud of this commission, Newman Noggs took up his post in the square on the following evening, a full hour before the needful time, and planting himself behind the pump, and pulling his hat over his eyes, began his watch with an elaborate appearance of mystery, admirably calculated to excite the suspicion of all beholders. Indeed, divers servant girls who came to draw water, and sundry little boys who stopped to drink at the ladle, were almost scared out of their senses by the apparition of Newman Noggs looking stealthily round the pump, with nothing of him visible but his face, and that wearing the expression of a meditative ogre. Punctual to her time, the messenger came again, and after an interview of rather longer duration than usual, departed. Newman had made 2 appointments with Nicholas, one for the next evening, conditional on his success, and one the next night following, which was to be kept under all circumstances. The first night he was not at the place of meeting, a certain tavern about half-way between the city and Golden Square, but on the second night he was there before Nicholas, and received him with open arms. "It's all right," whispered Newman. Sit down, there's a dear young man, and let me tell you all about it." Nicholas needed no second invitation, and eagerly inquired what was the news. "There's a great deal of news," said Newman in a flutter of exultation. "It's all right. Don't be anxious. I don't know where to begin. Never mind that. Keep up your spirits. It's all right." "Well?" said Nicholas eagerly. "Yes?" "Yes," replied Newman. "That's it." "What's it?" said Nicholas. "The name, my dear fellow." "The name's Bobster," replied Newman. "Bobster!" repeated Nicholas indignantly. "That's the name," said Newman. "I remember it by lobster." "Bobster," repeated Nicholas more emphatically than before. "That must be the servant's name." "No, it ain't," said Newman, shaking his head with great positiveness. "Miss Cecilia Bobster." "Cecilia, eh?" returned Nicholas, muttering the two names together over and over in every variety of tone to try the effect. "Well, Cecilia is a pretty name." "Very, and a pretty creature too," said Newman. "Who?" said Nicholas. "Miss Bobster." "Why, where have you seen her?" demanded Nicholas. "Never mind, my dear boy," retorted Noggs, clapping him on the shoulder. "I have seen her. You shall see her. I've managed it all." "My dear Newman!" cried Nicholas, grasping his hand. "Are you serious?" "I am," replied Newman. "I mean it all, every word. You shall see her to-morrow night. She consents to hear you speak for yourself. I persuaded her. She is all affability, goodness, sweetness, and beauty." "I know she is. I know she must be, Newman," said Nicholas, wringing his hand. "You are right," returned Newman. "Where does she live?" cried Nicholas. "What have you learnt of her history? Has she a father, mother, any brothers, sisters? What did she say? How came you to see her? Was she not very much surprised? Did you say how passionately I've longed to speak to her? Did you tell her where I had seen her? Did you tell her how, and when, and where, and how long, and how often I have thought of that sweet face which came upon me in my bitterest distress, like a glimpse of some better world? Did you, Newman? Did you?" Poor Noggs literally gasped for breath as this flood of questions rushed upon him, and moved spasmodically in his chair at every fresh inquiry, staring at Nicholas meanwhile with a most ludicrous expression of perplexity. "No," said Newman, "I didn't tell her that." "Didn't tell her which?" asked Nicholas. "About the glimpse of the better world," said Newman. "I didn't tell her who you were either, or where you'd seen her. I said you loved her to distraction." "That's true, Newman," replied Nicholas with his characteristic vehemence. "Heaven knows I do." "I said too that you had admired her for a long time in secret," said Newman. Yes, what did she say to that?" asked Nicholas. "Blushed," said Newman. "To be sure, of course she would," said Nicholas approvingly. Newman then went on to say that the young lady was an only child, that her mother was dead, that she resided with her father, and that she had been induced to allow her lover a secret interview, at the intercession of her servant, who had great influence with her. He further related how it required much moving and great eloquence to bring the young lady to this pass, how it was expressly understood that she merely afforded Nicholas an opportunity of declaring his passion, and how she by no means pledged herself to be favourably impressed with his attentions. The mystery of her visits to the brothers Cheeryble remained wholly unexplained, for Newman had not alluded to them, either in his preliminary conversations with the servant, or his subsequent interview with the mistress, merely remarking that he had been instructed to watch the girl home and plead his young friend's cause, and not saying how far he had followed her, or from what point. But Newman hinted that from what had fallen from the confidant, he had been led to suspect that the young lady led a very miserable and unhappy life, under the strict control of her only parent, who was of a violent and brutal temper, a circumstance which he thought might in some degree account, both for her having sought the protection and friendship of the brothers, and her suffering herself to be prevailed upon to grant the promised interview. The last he held to be a very logical deduction from the premises, inasmuch as it was but natural to suppose that a young lady, whose present condition was so unenviable, would be more than commonly desirous to change it. It appeared, on further questioning, for it was only by a very long and arduous process that all this could be got out of Newman Noggs, that Newman, in explanation of his shabby appearance, had represented himself as being, for certain wise and indispensable purposes, connected with that intrigue, in disguise, and being questioned how he had come to exceed his commission so far as to procure an interview, he responded that the lady appearing willing to grant it, he considered himself bound, both in duty and gallantry, to avail himself of such a golden means of enabling Nicholas to prosecute his addresses.